Welcome to Face to Face. This is an impossible time, and the answers are even more difficult to come by than they have been in the past. And so today's Face to Face is going to be a little different with a special guest. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Face to Face. Hello, Rabbi Litwak. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you. I'm not the special guest.
You are a very special guest. You are, but you're not a guest. You're a host. Sorry.
No, I am a host.
So, we had planned, like 3 weeks ago, I think, that today is International Hummus Day. And I actually had in my calendar to buy a whole bunch of different hummuses, I'm not sure how to say that, to bring so that we could taste test and everything. And then, of course, here we are.
You know what? I actually think that there's something to be said about, let's honor International Hummus Day for being both something that brings really the whole Middle East together, because everybody eats hummus, but also that hummus can be something that divides us as well, and that there is fierce debate over who makes the best hummus and what should be in your hummus, what shouldn't be in your hummus. On the other hand, what I'd like for us to think about is really that whether you like it this way or that way, or who makes it, that we could all share it together in peace and harmony. And right now, that seems impossible.
And by the way, I don't know how they knew, but the whole Big Brother thing. So on my Google feed, I got every flavor of Sabra hummus ranked.
Well,
I don't even like Sabra hummus, but maybe we'll put that in the chat. So, right. Rabbi, when you and I were talking about this, I think we both felt like, well, I'll just speak for myself. I feel woefully unqualified to speak about what's going on in Israel, in part because I'm not there, in part because I just haven't steeped myself in the conflict. And so we really wanted to bring in a special guest today.
Yeah, I think this is an extremely complex situation. It's a moving situation. And so it's great that we have Shy as our guest.
Yeah, so we really are very, very blessed. We're going to be joined by, in just a moment, Shy Ashkenazi. Shy is the Senior Shaliach up in North Virginia. Just for those of you who are wondering, we have a Shaliach in here in Miami. She is on maternity leave in Israel, actually. She and I connected yesterday, and she directed us to Shy. Shy has spent more than a dozen years working in informal education, managing educational teams in Israel and the United States. He's led large-scale educational projects with different Jewish organizations and foundations, and I had the chance to connect with him yesterday and was really struck by his insight. So I want to just welcome Shy to our program. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And if I could just start, I just want to check in. How is your family doing? Where are they? Are they safe?
Thank you. Yes, my family's in Jerusalem, most of it, and they are safe. And I have a sister up north. She's safe. One in Tel Aviv, also safe. So luckily, so far, my friends and family are safe, and I'm happy to report on that. I was actually just in Israel visiting, and as I was saying goodbye to everyone, we heard the siren in Jerusalem. That was the starting point of all the rockets falling on us.
Wow. That question, that what you just said, the starting point, is something that I know Rabbi Litwak and I have talked a lot about. Rabbi, did you want to jump in there?
Look, I think that if we go to the international media and we know that is problematic, they would point to what is happening in the community of Sheikh Jarrah, which is right on the old border, the old green line between pre-67, 1948 to 67, Jordan, and then now Israel. So right there there in Jerusalem, the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, and also the military going up onto the Temple Mount into the Dome of the Rock, and they would say that those are the things that's the starting point. And I'm hoping that that isn't what you would say it is. I don't think it is, but I'd be interested, Shy, in your kind of starting us off by giving us a little bit of background, not just for what's happened over the last 3-4 days, but maybe stepping back a little bit further.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's all because of the hummus, the arguing over who makes the no. It's interesting. After talking to Rabbi David yesterday, you referred me to Trevor Noah to see his recording. It was interesting because he said it all depends on what stage of the timeline you start from, and then you say whose fault it is according to this time or this time, and it changes all the time. I'll try to keep it short, but if we look back, in the past month or so, a lot has been going on. Now, if I refer to Sheikh Jarrah specifically, this dispute has been going on for almost 30 years. Last time a family was evacuated from there, I think was around 2009. It's a legal issue that has to do with renting, sort of renting the houses that were formerly owned by Jews from 1875, and then 1948 this area passed to be a part of Jordan. 1967 back to Israeli hands. It's very complex. The Supreme Court is involved in this, but it's a stretch of time that's over 20 years of involvement in this, with riots and demonstrations and court involvement in all this. And we're talking about 4 families right now who are supposed to be evicted out of those homes, and 4 others that might be evicted in the near future. Right now, it's all postponed in deliberations in the court. So that's one part of it that definitely, incites and brings some adds some oil to the fire that's been going on. But if we look at the past few months with some reactions from shootings from Gaza, if we're talking about some stabbings around Israel, but mostly what was going on around Jerusalem throughout the month of Ramadan, the holiest month for the Muslims, a lot of national arousal from a lot of young Arabs in Jerusalem. What happens mostly is the control of the social media that brings them together and calls for incitement and for actions against Jews. A lot of TikTok videos that you could see of young Arabs just stepping up to ultra-Orthodox Jewish young men and slapping them on the light rail, or attacking people on the street with hot coffee to their faces, or different things like that. So all this came to be something that had to increase the involvement of the police in the area of mostly East Jerusalem around the old city. There's always police presence there because of the tension right on the border of West Jerusalem, East Jerusalem. With that, and with trying to prevent more of the violence there, the police decided to put some barricades and block certain areas at the entrance to Damascus Gate to the Old City, where people go through into the Muslim quarter, in order to prevent young Muslims congregating in the nights of the Ramadan, as they usually do, and that is due to the increasing violence in the area. The blocking of that area caused more riots, more violence, rocks and fireworks shot at police officers and border patrol soldiers from Israel, with the demand to remove those barricades. Eventually, the police took those out, but it still didn't stop. On the other side, from the Jews in Jerusalem, some extreme groups like Lehava, if you heard of that group, marched towards that area to confront those young Arabs. Not an ideal situation, that's to say the least, but we're talking about a lot of friction even before what we see these days. As a response, and due to the fact that the Palestinian Authority was supposed to have its elections, and Hamas is increasing power, Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, decided to cancel or postpone those elections, claiming that it is because Israel would not allow those Muslims, Arabs, Palestinians in East Jerusalem to vote in Jerusalem, even though they had the opportunity of going to vote in other places, who said, no, we're canceling. Most people would say it's mostly because he was scared to losing those elections. And now Hamas is looking to increase its power in the Palestinian Authority to get elected. And at a certain point, they said, we are going to protect Jerusalem. As I like to say, you mess with Jerusalem, you mess with us. And with that, increase their power with the Israeli Arab society, mostly young people, but not only in Israel. That's really in a nutshell of what came before what we see now.
Okay, Rabbi, before we go on, I just wanted to let people who are watching know, because we have a number of people watching both on Facebook and YouTube. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll do our best. We're going to, I'm sure, go a little longer than usual today. We'll do our best to address those questions, if not answer them. May I ask a question? I'm curious. So then we have all of this stuff that has happened. Is it fair to say that the rockets being launched right now are in direct correlation to, the possible evictions or the coming up on the Temple Mount? I mean, is that why this is happening?
From my perspective, yes and no. Every once in a while, Hamas starts launching rockets at Israel. We know that last time that we had a real big operation was 7 years ago with Protective Edge. But every once in a while, we have an escalation. We have rockets shot. The people of the south of Israel, especially the Gaza envelope, do not have silence most of the time. And lately, we even got a renewal of those firing balloons that land and torch fields in the area. So in a way, yes, it's a response, but also an excuse for Hamas to engage with Israel in shooting that way. I will say that, other measurements that came from Israel that were not necessarily explained to the public, like blocking this past Saturday, blocking the route number 1, the entrance to Jerusalem, to prevent more Muslims coming to Temple Mount and rioting after having in the prayers, having people at Temple Mount throwing rocks and rockets and fireworks at the police officers. If any of you saw on Yom Yerushalayim on Monday, the burning Temple Mount, a lot of images came out where you saw people praying and dancing, celebrating Yom Yerushalayim at the Western Wall, and in the background you see the fire at Temple Mount. That was actually a tree that was burning as a result of fireworks shot towards police officers.
So, Shy, I want to do some rapid fire questioning, because I think that there are a few things that I want to make sure people understand, and so that we can kind of fill in around that. So you mentioned the Gaza envelope, right? Tell us sort of where that is geographically. I mean, we know where the Gaza Strip is. How is that defined?
So the Gaza envelope, as the definition is any of those Israeli towns, cities, villages that surround the Gaza Strip, the south of Israel, by the shore, and really we're talking about the few kilometers from the Gaza Strip into Israel that really are surrounded. The main city that you might hear about is Sderot, that is getting shot, but a lot of kibbutzim, a lot of other sort of villages and towns in the area that really do suffer and have been suffering for almost 20 years. I'm not going to go into the whole history of the disengagement from Gaza and everything that also resulted with the rising of Hamas within the Gaza Strip.
Right. Okay. So great. I want to come back to the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood and just help people understand why is it that these people are being evicted from their homes. This is something that the lower courts in Israel have dealt with. They ruled in favor of Jewish ownership, but allowed for Arabs to live there, to pay rent. Are they paying rent? Is that why they're getting evicted?
Yeah, so the rent issue I think is the main thing. I'm not an expert on Sheikh Jarrah and what's going on, but just as I said before, 1875, two Jewish organizations decided to build a neighborhood around the tomb of Shimon HaTzadik and bought land from privately owned land from Arabs in the area, started building there. And for a very long time, this was a coexisting area with Jews and Arabs. Even now, by the way, when the riots are not happening, you can see people coexisting in that area. Yes, there is tension, but not all the time. Fast forward to 1967, when the land came back to Israel after the Six-Day War. These houses where Arab people lived in, and they paid rent actually to UNRWA or Jordan, now were meant to pay the rent to Israel or to the owners. By this time, the deeds were sold to different organizations, mostly more extreme right settling Jewish organizations looking to settle this area. And now those people have to follow the lease, right? Like any one of us renting a house, we need to follow, we need to pay rent and everything. Those organizations are using loopholes in a way, saying that those people are either not paying the rent and have been living there for 70, 73 years, and the rent originally for Jordan was 1 dinar, which is no money at all, very symbolic. So either that, or maybe they build something on top of the house, another floor or expansions, or change the structure of the house. And the loophole is basically saying, you're breaking the contract. And with that, they go to court and ask for eviction as the tenants are not following the lease accordingly. The state is not really involved in this. This remains as sort of a fight between the people renting out or renting those houses. It's very, very complex. As I said, I'm not an expert, but this is what the court is facing mostly.
So now I want to talk about Hamas and really the internal struggle that I think is part and parcel of what is happening, where in my, and I'll ask, I want to try this on and you tell me if I'm in the right direction. But we have seen Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, the head of Fatah, be in power since, I believe, 2006. He has canceled elections before, and yet he is not providing any leadership for his people, right? And you have Hamas on the other side, who is, of course, being supported by Iran, being supported by other Arab nations, and they are building an ever-strengthening support from the Palestinians who are particularly in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, because Fatah and the Palestinian Authority aren't really providing any leadership, and that now I'm curious whether, and I simply don't know, whether there's any voice coming from Fatah and the Palestinian Authority, or whether the control of social media, which is becoming an increasing player in all of this rioting, in all of what's happening, whether that is being controlled by Hamas themselves.
So I don't really know about the distribution of power within the Palestinian Authority and Palestinians with that. I will say that yes, Hamas is gaining more and more power, mostly because of this, I want to say stagnant, but I'm not sure I'm using the right word. Being an Israeli, sometimes I don't use the right words. But because Fatah, Abu Mazen, there's no shift in any direction, not with the peace process, not with the change of status in relationship with Israel. So the fact that Hamas is taking some sort of stand and doing something, in most cases we're talking about terror attacks, or in all cases, that is a movement in some direction for the
If I
Palestinians,
if
right? Someone's
I'm a
taking
young
action.
Yeah, if I'm a young Palestinian and I'm feeling like I have nothing else, nobody's giving me anything, and I
Right.
have grown up with this situation with no sight into the future that it's going to get any better, I'll turn to anybody in the absence of leadership. I'll turn to anybody who will say anything that's leadership.
Exactly. Absolutely. Anyone that's doing something, because other than that, you just get nothing. And that's a reality.
Right.
When we're talking about social media and incitement in social media, we can also see right now and others, we love that phrase fake news, but um, uh, a lot of things that we see and a lot of the images from Gaza, yes, the IDF is bombing in Gaza right now, but also we need to remember that uh, almost a third of the rockets being shot from the Gaza Strip actually end up falling because not all of them are so great inside the Gaza Strip and hurting the civilians. So, and it's the presence within a dense, very dense populated area, a presence of headquarters and places of manufacturing the rockets and everything, launching pads within the civilian area. So a lot of the people of Gaza are actually against Hamas, but they're held captive, as some would say. And we've seen images before throughout the years, throughout the past 16 years or so, of the ruling of Hamas in Gaza, of them shutting down or shutting up anyone who resists them within the Gaza Strip. Um,
Right.
so so they are gaining that power, and they're very the fact that they're doing something and calling it right now. They said, we are with Jerusalem, and there are some illustrations you can find online from Arab media. You can see how Gaza is embracing Jerusalem and basically covering the entire land of Israel and saying, this is the way that we're going to get it.
Shai, can I ask you a question? Because you mentioned you were just talking about leadership, and it's not my question. It's a question from Julia, who's watching, and she asks about why the Israeli police raided the mosque. And if I could just broaden the question a little bit to maybe have you talk a little bit about leadership on the Israeli side. Where do
Mm-hmm.
you think they have maybe not done as well as they could, and where do you think that they really have stepped up?
Absolutely. So I do have to say, when we talk about Temple Mount and Al-Aqsa place there, the controversy is always there. We need to remember that we're talking about Israel territory. This area is Jordanian ruling with Israeli security measures. That's the main definition. So the Israeli police, Israeli Border Patrol, are in charge of security and safety and the quiet in that place. Jews are rarely allowed to go onto the Temple Mount, which is also a very significant area for Jews, of course. Um, but every time there are mass prayers, especially at the end of Ramadan on Temple Mount, the result is always some sort of awakening, a negative one that brings to violence. And especially with what we saw the weeks prior to this, with Sheikh Jarrah in the background, with the blockade of Damascus Gate, all that, the riots in East Jerusalem brought to a point where police presence was there to make sure that there's peace and quiet. They were not raiding and marching on to disturb the prayers. They were monitoring to make sure that we don't get overcrowded at Temple Mount, that there's peace and quiet there, that not accidentally anyone from the Jewish side decides to come and provoke and do anything like that, just to maintain peace and quiet. Standing there, and you can somewhat understand it, was not pleasant to some of those people praying, and the result was throwing rocks, shoes, fireworks at the police officers. There's always police presence in that area just to keep the peace and quiet in the area. Now, to the question of leadership, as I mentioned before, with this whole situation, the fact that the police was instructed to block that specific place outside of Damascus Gate to keep the peace and quiet and to make sure they're not congregated without prior knowledge of the civilians in the area was a harmful thing in a way. Was it just? I don't know. I'm not really super well informed about everything and all the decisions that were made that brought to that, but that was adding more fire. Blocking the entrance to Jerusalem, as I mentioned before, without notifying people ahead of time, caused massive traffic jams, but also dozens of buses of people who came to pray in Jerusalem that were stopped before the entrance to Jerusalem, and people went off the bus and started marching towards Jerusalem, inciting each other, flaring up everything and all the emotions. So my interpretation is, if the leadership would have and police would have said, if you intend to come to Jerusalem, just know we're not going to allow people to come into Jerusalem, to prevent too many people at Temple Mount, to prevent any of those things. On Yom Yerushalayim, we still had the dance of the flags. We had masses of Jewish people marching towards the old city. Luckily, at the last minute, they decided to not allow them to go through Damascus Gate and the Muslim quarter to prevent any of those riots. But still, it is definitely something harsh. And with Sheikh Jarrah, I have to say that Itamar Ben Gvir, who is a right-wing member of Knesset who was elected now, very controversial, actually placed himself in Sheikh Jarrah and put a sign that this is now his chambers. So this is definitely provoking. And with the fact that Israel right now, unfortunately, does not have a government, and with the
Right.
trying to form a coalition that, by the way, I just saw now that might have failed the second time now with the change block, mostly because of the fact of everything that's going on now. The Arab parties that might have supported this coalition decided to back out of this any negotiations while this is going on, because they cannot be a part of any coalition that approves a bombing of Gaza or anything like that because of their position. So it is all one big mess. And with what we see right now on the streets of Israel, taking out Hamas and all that, but with in Lod and Akko and Yafo and the north and so many places, they're increasing the presence of police, but you don't hear enough of the leaders, in my perspective, enough of the leaders stepping out, condemning what is going on. Netanyahu went out to Lod today and stood there and talked about a fierce and harsh reaction to what is going on in the streets and trying to get it all, dissolved. But definitely on both sides, we need to see within the Israeli Arab society, within the Jewish population in Israel, we need to see more of the leadership pulling people back. I do have to say that with everything that's going on in the street, it's a small amount of people, large enough to create the situation we see now of lockdowns and violence and all those horrifying things. But it's a small, very small fragment of the population on both sides.
So there are two things I want to just point to. One is this notion of a lack of a strong and stable Israeli government, leading to a lack of preparation or preparedness. It seems like I know the Israeli government and I know the Israeli military said we were fully prepared for this. We were fully ready for this to happen. And yet it seems like every Israeli that I've spoken to said they were not, meaning the population itself was surprised by this situation. So that's, you're shaking your head. That seems to be, I'm on the right track there.
Right. So I think we were prepared to what's going to come from Gaza. By the way, I don't remember if I mentioned it, but what happened on Yom Yerushalayim is, with forces trying to increase security around Temple Mount and everything, Hamas gave an ultimatum and said, if by 6 p.m. you don't remove all forces from that area, we're going to react, which they did. 6:03, we had heard the alarm in Jerusalem. So that was a part of it. Well, of course, Israel is not going to take the ultimatum of terrorists with that, where they're trying to maintain the security. So with what was coming from Gaza, I think we were prepared, right? We were not completely surprised. We were surprised it came to Jerusalem before it started raining harder on the south of Israel, because in the past it would escalate, but now they just started, hardcore center of Israel rains of rockets. But what happened and what is happening right now on the streets of Israel is something that I don't think anyone predicted was going to happen. A lot of people talked about how in this past year, especially with the pandemic, with Jews and Arabs working together, with healthcare, with everything, with creating a bond, with the fact that some Arabs actually got closer in the last round of elections, got closer to some of the parties, the fact that we have an Arab party, Ram, who's willing to negotiate the coalition in a certain way, all that even Netanyahu approaching the Arab population before this last round of election, calling them to be a part of the the structure of Israeli society in such a way, everyone thought it was going to be a better coexistence. But underground, what we see is an arousal that we didn't really expect. And that is the main shock that is holding everyone, including me right now. Have not stopped looking at the news with tears in my eyes for what is going on between civilians in Israel.
And that's where I wanted to go next, which is what has been, I guess, most surprising to me is that in the communities like Lod, like Akko, where they have been maybe not peaceful coexistence, or peaceful coexistence, certainly coexistence for many, many years, successful coexistence. Now all of a sudden that feels broken. And I wonder where that's going to go. And I also wonder whether we are seeing the extremists on both sides, okay? Ultra-nationalist right-wing Israelis who are claiming, this is all our land and you get off of it, on the Jewish side, and Hamas claiming this is all our land, you get off of it, on the Arab side. What's your take on that?
Like, reality is broken in a way right now. This is the way I feel. I've been watching the news almost nonstop just to see, but it's in between work and everything. And you're mentioning Lod, you mentioned Akko, you mentioned Yafo and other places.
Yeah.
Most of the people who came and are rioting there are not necessarily from those places. I do have to say that. But even with that, one of the most heartbreaking moments I saw on the news was when they interviewed an Arab guy in Lod who said, the guy next door in my building, right here, door to door, is Jewish, and we've been getting along. And then the reporter asked, and what do you think? Is it going to remain the same from now on? And he said, no. We are dealing within Israel with a fracture that I don't remember seeing much of. A lot of people are talking about negligent behavior. If we're talking about leadership, the Arab society has been suffering from within with a lot of violence. Money was supposed to be allocated to fight that, with crime families and tribes within the Arab society fighting each other and feeling like they're being neglected by the government in dealing with that. So you have illegal weapons running around the streets with those crime families that are now targeting the Jewish people in those areas. But you also have a population that feels like they have been neglected by the representatives in the Knesset, by the government at times. And you have a mass, small, but still a mass of Jewish people who said, we are a sovereign country trying to protect itself on the south, and now you're coming and on the streets rioting and trying to break this very fragile texture of life that we have. It's really hard, and it's heartbreaking, and you can definitely understand when people talk about equality, and it's important to talk about Palestinians at the West Bank and Gaza as one part of this, and the Palestinians who are citizens of Israel, who are feeling, some of them, more affiliated with Hamas, and and a few individuals who actually said on the news, yeah, we want Hamas to shoot towards Israel. And they said, they're shooting at you. They said, that's fine by me. Having in Lod a family of Israeli Arabs who died, a father and daughter. Just like anyone else, it's heartbreaking to hear about a 6-year-old who died yesterday from a hit in his house. That's devastating down in the south of Israel. The rockets are hitting kindergartens, convenience stores, and then on the other hand, you see when we're dealing with all of this, you see one front in the south with Hamas that we need to deal with, and other fronts, at the at home that we need to deal with now, that is taking the forces and the energy from that front that we need to deal with the rockets. Maybe it's part of the strategy of Hamas to incite that way, so they pull the fire out of dealing with that and more of domestically dealing with everything that's going on.
Rabbi David, can't hear
Sorry, we
you.
can't hear you.
I'm so sorry. I muted myself so I didn't interrupt because I'm just listening. Gantz has called up Border Patrol. Reservists have been activated. Where is this going? Are we looking at a ground war in Gaza?
So it could be just about, I think it was an hour and a half ago, 2 hours ago, IDF spokesperson was on the news, and he said that they are preparing to, if necessary, going in with infantry forces and armored corps into Gaza, which is something we try to avoid as much as we can because there are a lot of repercussions there. But yes, we might be facing that.
I'm watching our time and recognizing that we're going to have to wrap up.
Yeah.
One of the hardest things, Rabbi David and I were talking about this before, is that for me, I have struggled not so much with what Hamas, the Arab Palestinians have done, because I don't expect more. I wish for more from them, but I don't expect it. What has been so painful for me is where I have seen Israelis do things that I find hard to imagine. Now, there was the situation where a group of Israelis pulled an Arab man out of his car and beat him. And I want to be clear, the exact same thing happened on the part of the Arabs, pulled an Israeli man out of his car and beat him. But it hurt me that the Israelis did it. And I'm wondering, this is going to be a challenging question, but my teacher in Jerusalem, Daniel Hartman, suggested in a piece that he wrote just recently that most Israelis believe that there's no peace partner, all right, and that we've removed the peace process from our public and policy agendas, all right? But what has been so hard is, why have we removed from our discussions, right, the responsibilities towards Palestinians from our agenda? Right? I am very clear. I want to be clear to anybody who's listening. Okay, I place full responsibility, almost full responsibility, onto Hamas, onto the Arab population. I don't see an equivalency of the Arabs shooting indiscriminately into Israel, whatever gets hit, versus Israel shooting into Gaza at targeted known Hamas enclaves. Right? That doesn't do it for me. And I don't buy into the moral equivalency that the media sets up, that simply because in Israel there's only 7 deaths, all right, that somehow, and in Gaza there are far more deaths. I don't buy into that equivalency, because the fact is that, right, if the Palestinians had put time and energy into this, if Israel hadn't created an iron dome, right, that saves its people, right, that there would be plenty of deaths, right, on both sides, right? But I'm just not satisfied to be able to say, we on the Jewish side, on the Israeli side, we offered, they said no, and therefore that becomes the accepted narrative, and that any suffering that happens is their own fault, right, and we can't do anything about it. Right? How do we take this to the next step? How do we get it past, right, that narrative of the blame game, you, and therefore we both throw up our hands and don't do anything?
Well, there are
Shy,
different
let's put it
questions
this way:
there.
if you have the answer, we're going to just set you up to be prime minister. Okay?
Yeah, I was just
so
about
I'm
to
not
say, if I had
expecting.
the answer, I would.
Yeah.
It's funny because I got a phone call 2 days ago. Someone left me a voicemail saying, I'm very concerned about what's going on. Someone has to do something about it. I want to talk to you. And I said, well, I guess I'm running for office now. I don't know. I don't have the solution, but I want to go back and I want to answer the different questions you asked, because you asked different
Yeah.
ones. I'm going to start with the horrifying views of both sides literally lynching each other, shooting at each other, marching in the streets, vandalizing everything. That image of that man, poor man, being pulled out of his car and hit. I actually wrote. I'm a writer, and I wrote a short poem about it today on Facebook. And I said, "You're not me. You're not me. You're walking the street with your red eyes, full of noise and blood and horrors, to locate a victim to hit, to hit with blood. You're not me. You're not a human being. You're not a person. Using the club with the flag, with standing behind a symbol, to dance over the blood of your enemy. That's not me. I was just looking for an outlet to say, I'm sitting and I'm looking at those images from both sides, and I'm just horrified by what's going on in the streets of some places in Israel. Um, it's for incitement. It's for lack of leadership in a lot of ways. The fact that Israel is polarized in so many ways, and I'm trying to avoid going into who is to blame in what way in Israeli politics, but the fact is, when we're facing another round of election every few months, and we don't have the proper way of engaging with everything, and Israel is becoming more of a right-wing state in a way, this is a part of the result. And you see more and more of those extreme voices, even though they're not marching on the streets, but using the fear, using those techniques of using fear against the people who you might face, brought us to a situation where hatred is something that exists on the street in such a way that is just horrifying right now. And really, I did not expect anything like this to happen. So that's on that note. How can we take this back? It has to be first by dispersing everyone, arresting and punishing whoever needs to be punished, this in the most severe way possible on any side, and after that, trying to recover. It's going to be a long process of recovery to try and do that. Now, yes, there's this concept of that we're not going to have peace, but maybe we can have coexistence. But this is also breaking right now, which is terrible. You mentioned taking responsibility for the Palestinians. And as I said before, there's a difference between Palestinians who are not a part of Israel and Palestinians who are in Israel but not citizens, and those citizens who are Palestinian Israeli citizens who receive
Yeah,
all the
thank you for
rights and
making that
privileges and
distinction,
equality.
Shy.
We have
Thank
different
you for making
populations here, right? You have those in Gaza, they are under Hamas ruling. You have the West Bank, you have Ramallah and other places, they're under the Palestinian Authority. And then you have East Jerusalem, where you have Palestinians who are residents of Israel but not citizens, like Sheikh Jarrah, other places. And then you have those who consider themselves Palestinians in nationality but Israeli citizens with full equality. You can see them as members of Knesset. You can see them in the IDF in high rank positions sometimes. You can see them in the Supreme Court. You can see them everywhere as equals, just like anyone else. And a lot of people tell me, yes, you don't treat all Palestinians equally. They don't all get all the rights. And I say, I live in the States now. I'm not a citizen. I don't have all the rights that you have because I'm not a citizen. I have certain rights as a human being. I have certain rights according to the accommodations of what I deserve with my visa here. But other than that, you have rights as a citizen that I don't have. I'm not going to riot over that. That makes sense. When you talk about taking responsibility for the Palestinians, Israel has been supporting the fluent incoming of funds from Qatar and support from other places, especially, by the way, when it comes to we need a ceasefire. So Israel says, okay, you can get this money coming from other places in order to create a ceasefire, basically, in a way, being blackmailed into a ceasefire. And all this money, we're talking about millions of dollars a year. When I talk about hundreds of millions of dollars a year, we come to a point where you say, and you talked about this inequality. No, it's not. It's not a numbers game. And this is where Iron Dome is a huge advantage for Israel and a disadvantage. And the power of the IDF, Israel Defense Force. And we need to remember we're defending ourselves. And this is what, I mentioned Trevor Noah before, and he talked about it in a way that I didn't like so much, and other people talk about it. We have the advantage of protecting ourselves from a terror group, a terror organization that is shooting rockets at us. However, because of that, we seem to be more powerful, and we seem to be not a victim because we only had 2 people die and not 20 people die, because all that money that was brought into the Gaza Strip, into the hands of Hamas, did not go to welfare, did not go to schools, did not go to create shelter areas or any defense systems for their civilians in those areas. It was created to create more rockets within and rocket launching pads within civilian areas. It was used to dig tunnels from the Gaza Strip into Israel that are cemented, cost a lot of money for terrorists to be able to infiltrate Israel underground. All this money is going to a military effort by Hamas to destroy Israel instead of taking care of the citizens. When we talk about taking care of Palestinians, Israel supported the Gaza Strip with in the past year with the pandemic, with resources to fight the pandemic, COVID-19, with gallons and gallons of disinfectants, with vaccines. The entire world said, why isn't Israel giving the Gaza Strip vaccines? We're talking about 2 different entities. It's asking, like, why wouldn't Guatemala give, I don't know, India the vaccines or whoever? Yes, we're side by side. We're 2 different entities that were supposed to get vaccines from Russia. That was delayed. And eventually Israel provided vaccines for medical staffs within the Gaza Strip, for over 100,000 legal workers from Palestinian Authority that come into Israel every day. So they gave them the vaccines as well. Israel has been taking care of the Palestinians to a capacity. With that, you have the Palestinian Authority and you have the Hamas, who are the rulers, who are the representatives, who are the leaders of this population, who are not taking care of them. And to cast the blame on Israel is a very big problem. Now, I'm not saying Israel is as we say in Hebrew, talit shekulat chelet, right? We're not perfect in many ways. But when Israel attacks back in the Gaza Strip, they announce and let people know, we are going to attack within the hour, evacuate, leave your homes so you can be protected. And you can see that from testimonies and videos that you can see with people who are in charge of, management of buildings and stuff get a call from the IDF saying, evacuate everyone so they don't get hurt. Problem is density and the location of those headquarters and the, where those leaders of Hamas live, that is way too close to their civilians. I can go and talk about that for a very, very long time. What would be the end of it and the solution? As we said before, if I had the solution, I'd probably be running for office in Israel.
Well, Shy, thank you so much for just sharing your thoughts and perspective. We can only do what we can do, which is continue to support the state of Israel, to believe strongly that Israel has a right to defend itself, that it has a responsibility to the welfare of its citizens in all of its ways. If we are bombed, then we have the right to bomb back. It is hard for us, but truly what we can do is continue to pray and reach out to those who are living under this untenable time of crisis that hopefully with the world coming together, bringing the sides to the table, that there can be some ceasefire, and then, as you said, over time build a fragile and maybe a stronger peace to a lasting peace. So, Rabbi David, any final thoughts on your end?
I'm so grateful, Shy, for your time. I've learned so much, and I guess the only thing that I would add as a way of thanking everyone for being with us is that we have a sizable Israeli community in our shul and in our ECE in Gan Sinai, and I just want all of them to know that we are with you, we are thinking of you, we're standing with you. Shai, we are absolutely standing with you, and just so grateful for your time.
Thank you.
And friends, we'll see you next time.
One last thing. Yes. So for those of you who are at Temple Sinai, I will be speaking about this on Friday night during Shabbat services. So as always, join us 6:15 on tsnd.tv, where I'll add a few more thoughts to what we've shared today.
Fantastic. Friends, thank you so much for being with us. And we'll see you next time on Face to Face.